picture I want to find is, this is only happening in media 24. It's not only that is my experience. But we have small groups of people who have to do the job. We don't have teams of journalists and photographers going out together anymore. And to people, photography is not only a photographer, it's a photojournalist. You work as a team and each one has a different role but is complementary, and together you are a strong team. There's no money to go out to small villages or rural areas to do stories anymore. If you can do it, it's really the exception. And it's concerning. There are few people working because there's no people to sit out. Sometimes they come on a live stream. I need to use the questions, and content is not even questioned because who is going to question it? So this is a problem not only for us as employees in the media industry. It is a problem for the country as a whole. But also, I've also gone through some of these processes, and I know that it's extremely stressful. I know that people develop psychological problems. They need support. But you're so scared of speaking out because if by miracle you survive this round, you may be targeted in the next round. As journalists, we are so busy with our job that we don't organize, we don't look at our rights, we don't belong to unions at scale. And that's wrong. And I hope tonight that our panel will empower us as journalists, as workers in the media industry, to know our rights, to know where to ask for assistance, to know how to position ourselves, how we must position ourselves to be better prepared when it happens, because it happens more and more frequently and at a huge scale. I mean, at ENCA, I believe it's more than half of the staff that's affected by the Section 189 process. So, from the Press Club, we want to say to all our members and even those who are not our members, everyone in the media industry that's affected, we feel your pain. We understand your position. Please, please listen tonight and take the advice and look after yourself. Nobody else is going to look after you and look out for you. With that, I think we can call our panel.
Okay, in no particular order, I would like to invite to the front our panel, starting with Mr. Helgard Cronjé, who's the Deputy Secretary General for Solidarity. Ms. Phakamile Hlubi-Majola, who's a former journalist and union spokesperson. Mr. Elijah Mhlanga, he is the chairperson of Africa Media and Communicators Forum. And last but not least, Dr. Trevor Khumani, he is the former journalist and a senior lecturer here at UNISA. So ladies and gentlemen, our panel for this evening, please join me in welcoming them with a round of applause. Our discussion is structured around 4 key themes. Number 1, what is happening in the media industry? Number 2, do journalists know their rights? Number 3, how can journalists protect themselves? And fourthly, who protects freelance journalists? I will now hand over to our moderator for this panel conversation, Antoinette Slabet, to lead the discussion. Antoinette, over to you.
Let's just get the mics sorted.
But I also want to give you another mic there at the bottom.
Okay, let me just give a bit of background. We invited Solidarity because you are the majority union at Media 24. Is that right? Yes. So Solidarity has handled several previous rounds as well, and we thought that they have good insight in the industry and in what is going on at the moment as well. Phakamile was a journalist, but she says she's here tonight as a worker. She understands how we think as journalists, but she has also seen the picture from the union side. Elijah is also the premier of the spokesperson. Oh, you almost got promoted now, no? He's the spokesperson of the premier, but he's also a former journalist, and the African Media and Communicators Forum that he is the chairperson of also assists members that are in this kind of situation, and he will tell us more about it. Dr. Hlungwane, I believe you were also a journalist. So except for Helgard, all of them were journalists. There's a life after journalism, it seems. And he's an academic at UNISA, so he will give us insight from that side. I'm just going to give you a few minutes to give us your overall impressions of the situation at the moment and where it's going. Can we start with you, Elijah?
Can you? Okay. All right. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much, Antoinette. My name is Elijah Mhlanga. That's true. It remains the same, even after I left the journalism job that I did for so many years. Sure. Yeah, this is better. Yeah, thank you very much. I should have been given this one from the start. Antoinette, I worked at the Star as well. I actually, even now, I work very close to the building. But yesterday, I drove past that building once again. My heart continues to bleed because it's now a ghost house. We used to have a bank inside that building. That's how busy it used to be. We used to have people coming there for all sorts of things. So I understand how you feel, especially if you were there before all this technology was there and before there was internet and all these things. In the newsroom, we used to have physical libraries. Now, things are completely different. So, what we have become, if I now need to talk about the African Media and Communicators Forum, we have realized that there is the change that has taken place is affecting not just journalists, by the way, even communicators. But what we are seeing right now where we are is journalists who are undergoing a lot of stress because of what is happening. In fact, a colleague was saying to me, she went to TUT last week to address a group of young journalists. So I said to her, how do they feel? Are they excited about getting into journalism? She says, yes. I said, but do they know what they are getting themselves into? Because those who are there are being forced out and they are going in. So the situation is very difficult. But at African Media and Communicators Forum, we have been receiving for years, lots of communication from our colleagues who are going through a lot of things. And we sat down and we said, what is it that we can do to support our colleagues? So we agreed that we're going to focus on 3 areas. 1 is legal support, and 2 is mental health support. And the 3rd is freelance journalism, to connect them to opportunities. But we've also now started developing the 4th quadrant, which is personal development in media and communications. We are partnering with an institution which is going to assist our journalists to reinvent themselves, because that's where we are now. Things have changed drastically, that you cannot rely on what used to be. You need to find a new way of reinventing yourself and finding new opportunities. We continue to assist. We are not so much a union, but more of a professional society who look after the interest of the members. We provide support. We've provided some support. Some journalists, it's just that it's difficult to talk about these things because some of it is sensitive. But we do provide legal support, but not just to individual journalism. You will recall that with the arrest of the suspects on the Aseri matter, we, together with the press club, we launched a court application to ask the magistrate to provide access to all media to cover that case. So that's what we stand for. We are for the interest of journalists, but also communicators. Let me leave it there for now.
Thank you very much. Okay, all right, that sounds better. Less of a sharp steward's voice. Yeah, so thank you, Antoinette, for the opportunity to be here tonight. I think the media industry and the legacy media is in a difficult time. These are changing times. I think it's sort of also a window into the future. To a certain extent, a lot of the technological advances has led to where we are today. Everybody has a phone, everybody has a camera, and everybody thinks they are a journalist. If you've got a social media page, you think you're a journalist. I think to a certain extent, that has allowed people to gain more access to information, and it's challenging the relevance of legacy media. In these changing times, however, I think it's important for journalists to understand that they must also think different and organize themselves better. I don't think with the advances in artificial intelligence that things are going to settle down. I think changes are going to become faster and quicker, and we would, as journalists, you would have to respond to that, and the best way in doing that is to organize good, understand the challenges, and to stand together. And I think from a trade union's perspective, I think that's one of the things that journalists aren't good at. I think everything a journalist is taught is about being objective and independent, and to remain independent, which means it sort of feels like they're going against their nature to join a trade union, for example. So I think it's something, this is the perfect time for a discussion like this. We see the real life things playing out before us at ENCA, at Media 24, at Novus Media. We've seen this over the last 3 years at Media 24. I was involved in the first retrenchment process in 2024. There was another one in 2025, and we're at the 4th one now. So I don't think it's a process that's going to stop quickly. We're going to see this at all the legacy media houses. The challenges are only going to become more, which means the response would need to be that journalists stand together. I also think that some of the things that Elijah said is very important. Usually, trade unions organize themselves within sectors and over large workplaces. That is sort of what trade unions have become over the last, let's say, 50 years. But before that, trade unions were called trade unions because they organized themselves according to trades. In today's language, we can speak about occupations or professions. And I think that's what we are also trying to do. You know, as Solidarity, we've sort of started building out the idea of occupational guilds. We call them occupational networks. But it's based on the origins of trade unionism, where people organize themselves according to trades. We try and do that according to professions. And that allows one to think differently, you know. It's also the same as a professional forum, like which Elijah represents tonight, you know. And I think that allows us to also address some of the issues that challenges the occupation and not only people at the specific workplace. And I think that's a very important progression in the current environment that we would like to elaborate on tonight. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And thank you once again, Antoinette, for this wonderful opportunity. And I also want to thank the Press Club for actually creating this opportunity for us to have this very important conversation. My name is Phakamile Hlubi-Majola. I am a former journalist who adapted from journalism into communications, and then went from communications into an entrepreneur, and now run my own PR and communications company called Black Star Creative. But in my work, I am still doing the work of communications in the labor space, which I was doing before, and I'm still doing now, but I'm doing it for the Motor Industry Staff Association. And I think I'm using my experience in my work history to sort of speak to you, because I see that some of you are students, some of you, and as I understand, would be studying communications, to sort of use that as an illustration for what you have to be in this industry. And what that means is you have to be adaptive, you have to be flexible, and you have to be creative. Because the sector is changing, and it's changing very rapidly. And what's making it change rapidly primarily is technology. And whether we like it or not, that's not going away anytime soon. Even when I was a journalist, and my history as a journalist is in broadcasting, radio and TV. And even at that time, we were experiencing changes when social media became a tool that was now much more important as part of our work. So if you are going into the space as a journalist, you must go in with a willing mindset and an attitude of adaptability, because that is what is going to help you to survive the space, but not just survive. It'll also, I would say, help you to thrive, because you can thrive. And I think it's very important for us, as we have this conversation, I don't want us to leave students with a sense of doom and gloom about the industry because of some of the things that some of us, I know myself personally, may have experienced. I think what we need to do is to fill them with a sense of hope, but not just with a sense of hope, with a sense of purpose. Because one of the most important things you can be is a journalist, especially when you understand what your role is. And what is your role? Your role is to hold those who are in power to account. And that is the most important role when it comes to the protection of democracy and democratic values, which are under assault, not just in South Africa, but all over the world. If you've been looking at what's happening geopolitically with the rise of fascism and the normalization of right-wing ideology, we are going to need strong, independent, fearless journalists more now than ever. And so I hope that our conversation, whilst it will obviously be focusing on the challenges around, organization or the lack thereof, I hope more than anything it will leave you fired up with a determination to be part of that journey. And I would argue, having been not just a journalist, but a journalist who organized in her workplace while working as a journalist, that the most important thing to be is a journalist who is organized. Because if we are going to ensure that media freedom is genuinely free, if we're going to ensure that the information that we're disseminating to the public is morally ethical and for the benefit of the public at large, then only a working journalist can achieve that. That cannot be achieved by the bosses who are influenced by profit and private interests. It can only be achieved by an independent, fearless workforce that believes it has the power to transform society for good, because that is what we need. So with that, I hope that helps to sort of also add in guiding the conversation that we're going to have today. Thank you.
No, thank you so much. Evening, colleagues, how are you doing? My name is Trevor Hlungwane. I work for the University of South Africa as a senior lecturer, but I've also worked as a journalist, and I'm glad that today I'm sitting next to Phakamile, because when we're outside, we're quite joking around how things have changed. When I joined the ANC, I found her there, and I think we're just talking around how things have changed. The fact that whenever we would have like OB broadcast, outside broadcast, we'd have to go rigging a day before, So now, with how technology is evolving, you'd find that you only need one reporter and one camera person to go cover a story. Previously, you'd have a whole team of SNG, engineers, production assistants, all be running up and down, maybe with a P2 card from the venue to the van outside to just ingest the content back to studio. But I think talking about how there's been a shift because of technology, it's good for us to reflect on then what is that we can use technology for beyond what it does to us, the industry. I think there could be a lot of trade-offs around how we can use AI as people, as professionals. And yes, we can't avoid the fact that it would have changed a lot of things in terms of the profession. But I think there's just a lot that we can use this for. And I'm hoping that tonight, as we reflect on some of the developments that have been happening in the industry, it's good that we look at what are things that we can use technology for in as far as bettering our understanding of the field, but also beyond that, just how we can empower young journalists. Like she's saying, it's not that it's all dark and gloomy, but I think there's things that we can learn from that, as far as bettering the new crop of journalists, but also communicators as across the field. So thanks.
Thank you. I'm going to ask you, Helgard, can you just update us on the processes where you are involved, the number of journalists that are affected, and where things stand at the moment where you are involved? And I want the conversation to be informal. If anybody wants to come in, please do.
Thank you, Antoinette. Yes, sure. So personally, I'm involved at the Media 24 retrenchment process. We've had our first consultation this afternoon, earlier today. One of the challenges at Media 24 is the fact that although we are the largest trade union there, we don't represent the majority in the sense that we've got 50% plus one of the workforce. So one of the challenges is to get the CCMA involved for a facilitation process. We have referred it to the CCMA, and we are still in a back and forth process with Media 24 with regards to whether we have the right for a facilitator or not. I think it's a very important point that we need to discuss later on when we get into the details of exactly how these processes work and what the benefits of facilitation by the CCMA are and what not. I think one of the challenges is if you haven't got a forum like the CCMA involved, and I think that's one of the things we are experiencing at Media 24, they sort of try and rush the process on the one side, and the other side is they sort of divide and conquer. So they consult with different departments, and they consult especially with non-unionized members. And what that does is it sort of leaves the organized journalists vulnerable because the process moves without you, and decisions are made to a large extent before you can influence the process. So I think that's what we're experiencing. I think our consultation went good, but it all depends on the information that we receive. The biggest part of the discussion was the rationale, the reasons for the retrenchment, which is basically what we've said now. You know, it's a changing environment. They want to have smaller teams that has the same output. Obviously, AI plays a role. They want people to write for the different publications. So they want a leaner structure and less employees and sort of the same output. Whether it's the same amount of content that they want to put out, I think it's debatable. I think they use content creatively in different ways, but it's the same content essentially. It's just packaged differently. So I think it's a difficult process to stop. I think that because the industry is in trouble, so it's difficult to attack the rationale, you know, to that extent, which means we have to see how many jobs we can save. You sort of go to a next level, how you mitigate the effects of the retrenchments. And I think that's what we are going to do. I think it's important, however, you know, that we have the right information to understand where this is going in future as well, because this is the fourth retrenchment in 3 years. We have to dive deeper, you know, and I think we've said that in some of our media releases. We have to fully scrutinize all the information, and that's one of the issues. They haven't been forthcoming with it. Oh, sorry, my apologies. So at Media 24, there's 141 posts affected. I think it's important, however, to clarify the proposed redundancies is about 66, if I can recall correctly. So they are basically making the team of 141 smaller to 141 minus 66, basically. That's what the consolidation will effectively mean, which means that it's likely that 66 people will lose their jobs. I know at NCA, if I can recall correctly, or at eMedia, the number of affected people is 171. At Novus Media, it's a much smaller number, but there's also retrenchments there. I calculated the number earlier today. It's more or less 300 people that are going to be affected, you know, within these three processes.
Yeah, you know, the saddest thing about this whole story is that everyone who goes into journalism, they do so because they love it. You see the passion, the sacrifice, and even the duration which people stay in the job. It's also an indication of the passion. But what you begin to see once all these people are retrenched, colleagues don't seem to have a way of branching into something else. We seem to be focusing only on what we know. You then see a proliferation of new publications. A former editor now starting their own publication, and someone else now trying to start something. So you find that they don't leave the space that they are familiar with. I don't know how helpful that is, because you are then competing with your former employer who has more resources than you can ever imagine across. Whether it's legal, whether it's technology, it doesn't matter. They have more resources. So you are competing with them again. You are not going to win. That's why we are focusing on this part of having to explore opportunities where you can reinvent yourself, find new opportunities, go into a different space. At the memorial service of the office memorial service of John Esai Maromo at Rosebank, I spoke and I said to the management, please allow your journalists to be involved in unions or even societies like ours and forums like ours. They must not be afraid, because even John Esai himself, and may his soul rest in peace, he was afraid to inform his employer that he was part of the African Media and Communicators Forum. We discussed this and it was difficult. For many years, I had to tell them that, why do employers create this fear culture? Why is it that it is difficult for media practitioners to belong in an organization where you will find other colleagues who will empower you so you can become better and stronger. So I said to them, please allow them to get involved. When we're in the newsroom, some of us, Temba is right there. I used to work with him. I met him at the Star. They know it was part of unions, Mwasa and SAUJ at the time, you know, the South African Union of Journalism. There was unions. I mean, there were unions that people could join. But those things are not there now. And it's sad because it seems like if you are a journalist, you are on your own. And it cannot be fair. It really cannot be fair. So we really need to work hard to encourage this because some of them are on their own. I mean, if you were to look at their state of mental health, I mean, it's very bad. They don't know where to go and who to talk to. So it's something that we really need to talk to employers to look into and try create a different environment for their workers because they create a fear, you can't join, but then the next thing they are retrenching you. Just at the weekend, we had an activity in Hammanskraal. We invite media, they come there. The first thing that the journalist tells you is that, you know, I'm part of the section, what section is it? Section 189. I'm here with you, but I'm thinking about the section 189. And I mean, that's the starting point to a conversation. So you can see that already they are affected, demoralized, demotivated. Do you think you'll get good quality journalism from that person? You won't, which then affects the quality of the work that they're going to produce. I was saying to Baloyi there that Baloyi, it looks like when it comes to media briefings, Phakamile, you made a point and you said journalism is about holding people to account. But if only a camera person comes to a media briefing, who's going to ask the questions? There's no one to interact with the powers that be. So it means that we need to now rethink these things because now, I mean, the press room at GCIS in Pretoria here was designed for lots of people. Now you have 3 cameras and 5 people and the whole room is empty. If it's full, it's officials. The journalists are gone. Even if it's radio, they sit there, watch the stream, take bites from that. Even with the print or digital colleagues, they watch the stream, take it from there. They are not questioning anymore. They just take whatever. And it's sad because even those of us who also work in the public sector, we don't prepare as much as we used to prepare anymore because those hard questions are not coming, which means the citizens are being robbed of good quality journalism, one, but also of accountability, which is what journalism is all about. So it's a sad state of affairs.
I think you've touched on a very good point, Elijah. And it really emphasizes the importance of workers in the media must be organized. I think this idea that many journalists have that joining a union is something that is alien or they are scared. Oh, there's a lot of fear in the newsrooms. And I remember when I was a journalist trying to organize my own colleagues to join. For us, it was the Communication Workers Union. And I remember saying that we cannot be empowered to demand from Jacob Zuma, when will he pay back the money? But we ourselves are too terrified to ask our own management very pertinent questions about how they run the business, questions on ethics, make demands for financials. I mean, a Section 189 process, which is a consultation regarding retrenchments, part of that process is that management must provide financial statements in order to rationally justify the job cuts. And how you cannot be too scared as a journalist to demand that from your employer. And I think the other thing that we must start to normalize, and I believe that there's space for this, is media houses cannot, the owners of media, and I think this is where the challenge comes in. What we seem to forget is that the owners of media houses are capitalists, which means that they're driven by profit. And whilst they might come out in the media with taglines like, what's that tagline? No fear, no favor. Thank you, Trevor. And pushing this idea of a free press, you as a working journalist have the right to ask or to demand a free press in whose interests and for whose benefit. Because it cannot be a free press for the benefit of the media owner and not a free press for the benefit of the worker as well. So those are some of the principles that have to change. As a media house, you cannot be separate from the values that you claim to have. If you're going to preach to the public that this is what you stand for transparency, you stand for accountability, you stand for truth, right? Then you've got to demonstrate that also in how you practice in your media house. Your media house must be an ethical media house. It must be a media house where workers have rights, where workers have freedom of association, have the freedom to join trade unions. I won't mention the name of a media house that was embroiled in a public scandal because its journalists were not allowed to wear dukes on air. You can Google that, you will find out who that media house was. And the point I'm trying to make is that as much as these are values that cannot just be talking points. You can't just say these things, you've got to live these things. And that applies even to processes like a restructuring, a Section 189, where things perhaps because of financial situations, because of disruption of technology, there's changes that must happen, but those media houses have a responsibility to do those and embark on those processes honestly and ethically, so that we do the least harm possible to the ordinary workers in the newsroom. And also and I know I've sort of been rambling, but just to emphasize the point made by Elijah, at the end of the day, when the quality of the newsroom goes down, we are all suffering as a result of that. So these are the fundamental things that we cannot ignore if you consider those things. Thank you.
No, thanks a lot. And just to add to that, I wonder how would we imagine democracy without a free media, in a sense that I think as we speak about holding power accountable, we should also speak around how then the media in its own nature should account to itself. To itself, I mean, to account to people that it employs, who then becomes the watchdog that we speak about in as far as government and corporate is concerned. I do believe that, and I think when Phakamile raised these issues around 2016, we thought she was basically dropping a dead dog in still waters because almost everyone was just quiet around the fact that journalists needs to have some sort of an organization as far as unions. But beyond that, just to understand that when then you organize as a group, how easy it is for you to hold someone accountable as far as your employer. Because what employers do in many cases is that they would sideline one person, victimize them, and inject some sort of fear into the whole group. And then you almost get fearful of saying that I could become the next victim. But I think if we could wage a bit of a fight, as a group, it's almost very difficult to have to divide that. This divide and rule kind of a thing that always happened. But also, I think we need to also start a conversation around the fact that maybe there is a need. I understand that the media is self-regulatory. What then do we expect from government? Mr. Mhlanga spoke about issues around starting new publication. Maybe its colleagues who have been lost their jobs, but what kind of support would they receive from government? Because I understand there's an issue around circulation when people are advertising as a rationale to say that you could only advertise in media house A, B, because in as far as numbers and reach are concerned, it makes much more sense. But what about grassroots media? What about your startups, who in many cases in rural areas are doing a lot of work in as far as taking the message from government down to people. In many cases, that happens in our indigenous languages, indigenous media. Often it's very difficult to have those media sustain themselves for a long time. I wonder from a government perspective, how can they support those startups to ensure that they also thrive? I understand that in some cases you'd get funding from your MDDA, get funding from other government-related organizations, but I think there is a need for the government to find a way to fund this media. Because for me, I believe that if you fund the media, you are basically funding democracy, because it's the medium through which you can hold power accountable. So I wonder what could be the conversation around that space in as far as having to support these small media houses. The most painful thing, I'm going to give you this, is that you go to press briefings and you meet reporters who depend on government for lifts. You know, it's almost very easy to have to manipulate them because you give them lifts to your media briefing. You could, if you want, even control the narrative through which they tell the story, because there's a dependence on you for their survival. So I wonder how we can look at that from a developmental perspective.
Thank you very much. I just want to add something. I think there's an important thing that one tends to miss, and I think you know, there's sort of this relationship between employers and trade unions, or sort of a perception that trade unions are bad when you are an employer, and if your employees organize themselves within trade unions, it's a bad thing. I think it's a misconception, however. You know, there can be lots of benefits for employers who embrace it and go with it, you know, and use that organization or structure to better manage your employees. You know, you've got a unified voice, you can establish forums. I think it can also be a very progressive way to manage your employees, especially in larger organizations, you know. And we've seen this, you know, where companies try and keep a trade union out, where they eventually come in and they embrace it and they use it to their benefit, that there's a benefit for both employee and employer. You know, and I think especially in a sector where your main resource is the people, you know, and their knowledge. I think it's important that employers look at it differently. You can embrace trade unionism and an organized workforce and leverage that to make more profits even, you know. So I think to a certain extent, there is opportunities for employers and trade unions to work better together.
Thanks. I just wanted to say that the other thing that has died is training. When I first met Themba in the Star newsroom, I had come there because independent newspapers used to have. I learned there from a practical experience is what propelled me from that point on to become the journalist that I was, because from there it was easy to do anything else. Now it's from class to newsroom, and from there straight to a big story. And you can see in the quality of journalism that is out there, because the companies are no longer investing in training. So you work based on what Hlongwane would have given you at UNISA, with no additional practical experience that you require for you. And most of the young ones, when you talk to them, because we always need to find out how they are finding journalism in today's world, they tell you that what they learned is different to what they're finding in the field. At the time, the companies acknowledged that. You went through cadet school, they take you to a real story, and you learned how journalism actually works in real terms. And it made you a better journalist. And the communities, at the end of the day, and this is what we need to always keep in mind, that we are not doing this for ourselves. You are doing it for democracy. You are doing it for the country. You are doing it for your audience. So it's now a chase for profits. Someone was saying, why is it that the CEO of the company that's currently retrenching was paid, I don't know whether it was 20 million or something, and then the next day you are retrenching people. So there's just something there that's happening, and I think Phakamile spoke to this, that they are capitalists. Maybe there's something we're missing there, but why are we in this business then if the obsession is about profits as opposed to the benefit to the country?
Thank you for that, Elijah, because you earlier spoke about development, and I was actually going to go back to that point, that also in encouraging pivoting for journalists, given how the industry has evolved, but also entrepreneurial thinking, because if we're going to have more journalists who are affected branching out on their own, it has to speak as well to how they are trained. And I think there are definitely gaps in there. So before we open it up to the audience, I'm going to ask the panel one question, but I thought maybe it's appropriate to also recognize Mr. Baloyi, because there are questions around government's role and support in this regard. Mr. Baloyi, if you can just wave for everyone to see you. All right, and my next question then to the panel is, how can journalists protect themselves? And maybe you can weigh in on the issue of the gap between the training that's currently offered in institutions of higher learning for journalism, because if we are to also respond to the current need, that side of training as well has to speak to the current needs of today and beyond today. Someone earlier spoke to how everyone can take out their phone and become a citizen journalist. And we don't really want to then step into the terrain of regulation and so on and so forth. But I think with proper training, that will allow journalists to think beyond just having a job. It would help. But also, as you share how journalists can protect themselves, please give practical tips, steps that journalists can take to safeguard their jobs, especially in navigating restructuring and retrenchment processes.
Yeah.
It looks like I'm the chosen one for this one. Look, I think I wouldn't be a true trade unionist if I don't do some recruitment first. You know, join a trade union. I think that's the best way, and I think that's basically what we've been saying. You know, if we say journalists must organize themselves, that's basically what we mean, is join a trade union. One thing that South Africa doesn't have a shortage of is, you know, different trade unions with different ideologies and different approaches. So there's a lot to pick from, to be honest, you know, and you can pick one that suits you. I think the important part is that one should realize that you need to organize. That is the biggest thing, and that is what trade unionism is about mainly, you know. A lot of people would say a trade union is about standing up for your rights, doing this, doing that. But essentially, if you break it down to the most elementary part, it's about organizing, and through organizing, gaining power and leverage to at least oppose things that are happening to you. It's the relationship between an employer and employee naturally means that the employee is at a disadvantage. And if you organize yourselves, you basically allow yourself that little bit of leverage to make sure that your rights are respected and that things don't just happen to you as an individual. To explain it maybe more practically with regards to a retrenchment process, in terms of the Labour Relations Act, a small-scale retrenchment is done in terms of Section 189 of the Labour Relations Act. It's usually at employers where they employ less than 50 people, or where less than 50 people are affected. The larger scale retrenchments are governed by Section 189 capital letter A, and that is why I earlier spoke about whether you can apply for CCMA facilitation or not. Obviously, so I mean, a Section 189 process is basically a defensive negotiation if you are an employee. If you go and negotiate for salary increases, I would describe it as an offensive negotiation. But a retrenchment process is nothing other than a negotiation, and you do it to protect yourself. If you look at it that way, it becomes obvious that you need power and leverage. That's what you need during negotiations, and you would only gain that when you are organized. Section 189A, people will describe it as a section that gives employees rights, but you can only exercise those rights if you know how to use them. And that is where trade unions and organizations come in, is you use that through organizing yourselves, getting somebody that understands how to use that different processes to counter whatever the employer is saying. How do you ask certain information? What information is relevant when you speak about profitability versus we aren't making a profit, we need to cut jobs, if it's technological changes, what information do we need to do that? I think it's important, if you look at these processes in any negotiation, the timing of when you do certain things strategically and tactically is also important. And I think that's where, if you haven't got the knowledge of trade union officials or at least their legal departments being involved, you don't understand how to use these specific mechanisms that the Labour Relations Act gives you. And essentially, an employer can just walk through the process, follow it like a tick box exercise, because people just go along with the process. To use an example, if a trade union is not involved, an employer can quickly go over the rationale. What they would do is to say, this is the reasons for the retrenchment. As employees, you would need to respond and propose alternatives. Is there any questions? And people would say no, because they don't know to what extent they can engage, first of all. Second of all, obviously, when you are an individual and you make proposals or give critics to management and the rationale that they've proposed, you expose yourself. Whilst if a trade union does it on your behalf, they don't know it comes from you specifically, so there's a certain extent of protection. But it's also more structured, it's not a bunch of individuals protecting their own jobs. It's a group of employees giving comment on the rationale as a whole, and I think that's important. Employees won't ask those questions, which means they can tick the rationale box and they can move on. Once you tick that rationale box in a retrenchment process, you are it starts flowing quickly from there. A retrenchment process has a specific flow. The largest part of that process goes around the rationale and discussing alternatives. Once that is dealt with, you speak about the packages and when you're leaving. And I think that's important. People don't realize that. But as soon as you say, okay, we accept the rationale, and it doesn't seem like there's alternatives, you are only discussing when you're leaving and at what rate. And those sort of small things won't be obvious to people that represent themselves. You would get at the end, you would say, no, we accept the rationale, there's no questions, and before you see it, you're out the door. And I think that's the important part, that you have and what you get from a trade union and being organized, is you get those small nuances and people that have experience in those processes.
Oh, sorry. One way of protecting yourself is also to join the African Media and Communicators Forum. So when the colleague who is a TV journalist was mentioned that Mhlanga Commission, the employer almost made a wrong move. But we brought in our lawyer, got involved in the issue, we guided the process, and her job was saved. They almost made a fatal mistake about something that had no weight. So we're able to assist in that way. And we assist others as well. Like I said, these are sensitive matters that we don't necessarily want to talk about the names, but people are seeing value in being part of an organization that has people who can provide the support that you require. Even during the retrenchment process, some of our members, we suggest to them that why don't you take up the counseling services that we have? Because our counselors will give you a different perspective on life and the options that you have. They will help you calm down, look at the situation differently, and will be able to navigate through the muddy waters that you might find yourself in. So those are some of the things that you can do, and those are some of the benefits that are there when you are part of something that is organized, that has experts and the support that you require. That way you are able to protect yourself and most of all, your loved ones, especially those who depend on you.
I think the issue of being organized cannot be emphasized enough. I think for those of you who are about to join the workplace, that should be the very first thing that you do when you join a workplace, is to find the union that is organizing in that space and to join that union. And for all the reasons that my colleagues have already outlined, because there is no way, do not fool yourself. You cannot negotiate on your own. You just cannot. It is impossible for you to negotiate in any way that is beneficial as an individual. There is always more power when you are negotiating within a group, and that can be either within a formalized structure of a union or an employee forum, which the law also allows. So if you happen to be in a space where there is no union, and I'm going to speak about this particularly because if you're working in the media space, the majority of organizations do not have recognized unions, then either align yourself with a union or join or create an employee forum. And I also want to remind journalists that journalists themselves, by the very nature of the work of journalism, it's a very powerful profession. And I feel sometimes journalists forget how powerful this profession is. We feel very empowered when we're holding the mic and we're asking questions of other people, but we forget that as individuals asking those questions, we ourselves are powerful, because not only are we powerful because we have the voice, but we're powerful because we know a lot of people. When we were trying to organize in my workplace, we realized that we could not come out publicly about the things we were enduring, because in a lot of media houses, there's all of these policies that can be used to discipline you. And that's why it is so important to align with the union. So even if the union itself is not organized, you establish relationships in your work. So reach out to GSs of organizations or leaders of political formations or lawyers, forums, etc., and tell them and say, look, we are having these challenges on our workplace. Can you assist us? You will find already, because you have established relationships with these organizations, they will give you advice and assistance, and they'll do it for free. And that information will actually help you with some of the things that you're dealing with. Even if your organization is not recognized, your union, for example, is not recognized in the workplace, if you are telling your union that a union, like in your case, Solidarity is not recognized, right, in Media 24, but the workers in Media 24 are able to go to the union and feed the union information, and then the union can then sort of communicate that to the public, because to do that yourself would jeopardize your work. So it does require creativity, and that is what we are trying to encourage here, to say that you don't have to be without any instruments. There are many avenues. Even Elijah speaks about their forum. There are many organizations and avenues that can assist you, but what you must not do is be silent. Do not be silent. Do not allow your boss to victimize you. And I think the other thing that I want to touch on as a woman is that women experience a lot of victimization and harassment of various kinds in the workplace. Unfortunately, the most untransformed space, in my view, is a newsroom for women. Some of my colleagues experience situations where right after having a baby, they're coming back from maternity leave, and the employer doesn't want to allow them to work flexible hours so that they can breastfeed or come home at a reasonable time because they've got a young child. I know a colleague who was told by a boss, a female boss, sadly, that she should put her child on formula. And her child at that time was only 3 months old. So again, this brings me back to the principles that I say are very important, that media owners cannot exempt themselves from the basic principles of human rights and the basic Bill of Rights and the rights that we fought for in South Africa. If you want to own a media house in this country, having the rights that were forged in blood through the battle against apartheid, then you have a higher responsibility to run a workplace that is ethical, that is fair, and that treats workers with dignity. And as a journalist, you have an additional power that you can use that against them, if I can put it like that, to sort of push for positive reforms in the workplace, to sort of say that you cannot preach to the rest of the world that these are your values, and yet the way you treat us here in the newsroom does not reflect those values. So I would really want to encourage media workers definitely to organize, and the other, to definitely inform themselves, educate themselves, and then to also use the power that comes with their job to improve their workplaces so that these places become more humane and also spaces that are really better workplaces. All right, thank you.
Thanks. So a few years back, I used to work for an NGO named after a former president. I won't mention the name. So one time in August, we get letters from the head of HR. She comes to the office, she hands us letter with 3 of us. So we ask her, she says, no, you have a meeting tomorrow with HR. Says, what is it about? She says, no, they just want to greet you. You can never get a call from HR to say, come and we want to greet you. Whenever they call you, there's a problem of some sort. So a day later, we go see them, and then they tell us about retrenchment. We were retrenched, the 3 of us. It was a new not a new NGO, but they were building a hospital and it was new. And then when we meet with them, they tell us that, no, we're facing financial problems. We think that we want to let you go because of that. We tried to fight that, but at the end, we lost at the CCMA. I think they could have, because they used a lawyer, right? They would have read the whole process, how it's going to unfold and everything. And from that day, what I said to myself is that I'm going to go back to school so that the next time I get retrenched, it should be much easier for me to get a job. So I came to do my master's at UNIS, and Prof. Charlie supervised that, my master's. What I'm trying to say is that young journalists, young communicators, they need to find a way to build themselves beyond their undergrad qualifications, because there's just a bloodbath everywhere, whether it's in communication, whether it's in journalism. Companies are scaling down, and the first department which they would cut down will be your PR, marketing and communication. So it is good that as we progress, we find ways to empower ourselves through education. In a class of 100 young journalists, there could be 1 or 2 who could find themselves in a newsroom, either reporting on TV or on radio. The others could end up in communications. The others could even end up not getting a job. So it's important that as we teach young journalists, as we teach young communicators, we knock this thing to their heads to say that the industry is troubled, but then there could be other avenues through which you could empower yourself and find ways to express what you have learned throughout, whether it's opening a company, whether it's joining an NGO. But what I'm saying is that if we're going to look into one space, we'll struggle to get jobs because jobs are just limited. So we need to tell these young people that you might be dreaming to become a journalist or this and that, but you're competing with other kids coming from your roads, coming from Stellenbosch, coming from UCT. And if you sound like me, who went to a village school, you are troubled because the media sounds somehow, it sounds different. You must sound different. Yeah. You must sound like Phakamile, like myself. So at the most, you even disadvantaged in the sense that even if you hold the qualification, the way in which you sound, the way in which you articulate yourself puts you at a disadvantage. But we need to understand that a newsroom would have a writer, it could have a graphic designer, and these are spaces that we could occupy as young journalists. And this should be spoken more, that there isn't just one role. There is a reporter who stands on a front of a camera on radio, but there is a journalist that could be a writer. You are much as a journalist as the person who's on TV. Yeah.
Thank you very much. As my colleague spoke, I thought about a few technicalities in terms of the Labour Relations Act that I think is very important for individuals to understand when we talk about how you protect yourself, because the Act sort of rewards you when you organize in a certain extent. If you look at Section 189, for example, Phakamile spoke about recognition within Media 24. As a trade union, solidarity is not recognized. What that means is we aren't a majority union in the sense that we don't represent more than half of the employees of Media 24. Yet, in terms of Section 189, we can represent our members within Media 24, even though we aren't recognized. Section 189, for example, would say the employer should notify the majority trade union. If there's no majority trade union, any trade union that has members in the workplace, if there's no union members, then the employees themselves. In other words, the better you are organized, they must prefer that better organized forum. If you look at Section 189A, where you've got the larger scale retrenchments, it sort of works in the same way, in the sense that if a trade union represents the majority of the employees that the employer contemplates dismissing, you can refer to the CCMA for facilitation. Now, the important part about that facilitation process is that you get a live referee. You've got these two forces going against each other. The rules that they play by is Section 189. If it's not facilitated, there's no referee, which means employees and the trade union would be at a disadvantage. If you have discussions about relevant information in terms of Section 16 of the Labour Relations Act, the employer can say this information is not relevant. If it's a facilitated process, the commissioner can then hear the arguments of both parties and decide whether the information is relevant or not. If it's not a facilitated process, the trade union can refer it to the CCMA, but that takes time. It delays the process. Sometimes delays can be to the benefit of employees, but it's also more difficult to go and explain to a commissioner that doesn't have the context of that specific retrenchment process why certain information is relevant or not to that specific process. So Section 189 also rewards when you are better organized, because then you get a referee, otherwise not. So it's important to understand those technicalities in terms of Section 189, because they sort of, you get better rights the better you are organized. That's sort of the way in which it works.
Thank you. We'll open up for questions from the floor. I already have two from our online audience, but I think let's start first with questions in the room. Please keep it short, introduce yourself. There's a mic in front of everybody, and then you can ask your question. We'll start with you there, and second one, and then we'll move, Oprah Willie third, and then we'll move to the front here.
Thanks. My name is Tim Sustole, qualified journalist, media practitioner in comms, and I'm really grateful to be part of this discussion. I have three questions. One is directed to Dr. Hlubane. Congratulations on your PhD. Do you think journalism institutions are doing enough to prepare students to adapt to the new way of doing things from an academic point of view in terms of research? Then I want to ask the second question to Mr. Elijah. Do you think enough is being done to prepare journalism students for the future career planning, particularly in terms of even the journalists themselves in the newsroom, besides the editorial roles of being an editor? Do you think there is enough being done to attend to that? But when it comes to funding, this question is directed to Bra Willie.
What other alternatives?
Stembiso, the last one.
Yes, I did indicate three, and it's because these questions are directed, informed by what has been asked them. Praveen, what other alternatives do you think community media and mainstream media can look into when it comes to funding besides government? Thanks.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Katlahora Musa, a journalist from New South Africa. Mine is a concern what happened to journalists over the weekend at the summers. The government allocated 15 million for the summers, but when the journalists got there, they were not given snacks, they were not given water, they were not given accommodation. So that is very bad what happened to journalists, given the amount of money that was allocated. I'm looking at him, but never know. Hey, Chair, I'm not sure. To be honest, the time is going to constrain me because I have stories to tell. And they have to cover all the panelists. But firstly, I want to start with Dr. Makanani and also Professor Siasanga. Here is my story. If you want to starve people of X, kill the hen. So it's related to the question. To say institutions of higher learning, are we doing research on continuous basis to make sure that we adapt our products in journalism to fit into the ministry? 3 weeks ago, Prof, there was a session in Seattle, the US, where they called podcasters. And there are people that we follow now because their stories, yes, are influenced by money, but their stories tend to give you an undiluted perspective. And they're very important podcasters that are even leading in the media industry. And why? There is a reason. I think we have learned a lot with Ukraine, Russia, what has happened. I happen to have a friend who happened to work where, but now he is in the administration. And when he speaks, he says, firstly, after we've got a story, we have to call our allies in Europe. Tell them first what is our position of the US. Then when they start to report on it, all of them are aligned. Hence, they even close Russian TV. Why? So it shows that now journalism on its own faces its own challenges. That's why for the first time, you might have seen when government issued a statement on the 7th of August during the weather thing. People were asking me, they say, why do we put this thing? We said, Prof, we said government further calls on the public to rely on official and verified information from government, we started with ourselves, and bona fide media houses, including South African Weather Service. So it shows that journalism is also vulnerable. Hence, we have casualties. Hence, now there is a call of contradictions to say government must say. Whereas we are an interested person. But from our side, I'll come to that, we are playing a role. We have more than 30 students now, journalism students. We expose them to government functioning. And most of them, let me tell you, I was calculating today, more than the ones that we studied. And I got more than 30 that have been employed now in government. They are no longer going that side. However, there is this element. Government departments, some of them, are now going to PR agencies. Not only for media purposes, but for information sharing. You'll see when a department goes, it goes on the ground, it targets, the people that it want to convince, and they do that. So it's not something that is in the media. So those are some of the options, Prof, that I'm saying we should look at, as my colleagues have said. But let me quickly then go to my panelists, and thank you very much. From a union perspective, there is this belief, maybe you'll respond, to say unionism, yes, is crowned, and I agree with all what you've said, representative. But people are saying they represent you whilst you are still be able to give them money. Once you are retrenched, there is no union that represents those who are unemployed. You'll never even hear them. It will represent those unemployed. If then sometimes the industrial action goes beyond an employer's capability, an employer simply close the gap. Those members are left on their own. That's the belief. But I think you can touch on it. But I agree on unionism. That's what I agree. But what I disagree is unionism for the sake of unionism. You should look at how do you empower your members when you are still their representative. Look at them, don't say it's because they bring money every month and then the union is fine. But when they are out of facing problems, most of them are on their own. But yes, their successes where unions have won long-trending things. I saw at least the city of Tshwane. Those people were out for 2 to 3 years, but at least they are coming back and so forth. So that is the antagonism that we also look at this, because the city of Chinese government, it exists for a longer time. Let me also go to the issue here, Elijah. I think I'm conflicted here, but the truth is the truth. That yes, we have journalists organizing themselves. You know, I have a picture of what journalism used to mean, which it's generational, it's not wrong. That picture says a journalist, there must be smoke in the, where they used to work. They must smoke heavy and newspapers and a cup of tea. That's how journalists were known. That's why even they say when you want to deal with journalists, make sure that there is that thing. You meet a journalist, they drink and they do. But the situation, and that was generational, it was not wrong. But the generations, the way they move, generational adaptability is quite important. And to me, I say the issue of being known as a good journalist with those drum pictures, you must smoke heavily and your time must not be, it's fine, it was generational. But how do now, Elijah, as peers, say to us, you know, because that is the best platform, when you are peers to say, what are challenges facing us now? How do we survive going forward? And we have learned that the hard way as government, Phakamile. We used to have even a ministry where we were saying it's 4IR. Elijah, remember, we're anticipating what will 4IR, then COVID struck. We had to plunge into virtual meetings, something that we didn't know. You get what I mean? Why? Is because of our research capacity. I'm going again to the university. Because our research capacities was more on sloganeering than pushing. So maybe those are some of the things. I'll just cut it half to say how do we, but as government, we need, and we should not even go into a vigil, net vigil for journalism. Never. Journalism is still going to be there. I told the students who were there when they were saying there are no longer opportunities in journalism. I say no. It's just like in teaching. Every person who has been a teacher can be anything in the world. Can be a president, you can be, but also be because you have to develop yourself along the lines. And I said to them, journalism have given you the tools and the trade in the information highway. The question is, which information highway do you take, do you specialize in? Like you were speaking about specialist writers. All right, it's said now, because last we were looking for health specialist writers. I tried, I don't get them because they're specific things. So maybe those are the challenges that as we dissect, and I hope our colleagues who are joining us online, I sensitize even the black editors there, to say here we are talking about now where you are needed most. Yeah, instead of taking a mourning, we are mourning people. No, the profession is strong. We'll live with it, but we must adjust it to what's happening. Thank you very much.
Mr. B, I was hoping you would touch on the 15 million from the Summers. But I'll give the panel the mic to just respond to some of the questions that were asked.
I'll be very short. I'm going to kill, is it two birds with one stone? It's like Mr. Baloi's question, Mr. Stoller's question. For me, and this is me, about training, I think the bounds of constitutionalism is changing each and every day. Concepts that were once sacred to parliament, the executive, the judiciary, have found their way into newsrooms. Words like the case has been postponed, the court has reserved judgment, things like that. We hear all these terms every day in the news. You get a sense that people who are saying these terms don't even get to understand what they mean. The other day I wrote on social media that I don't think there's such a thing as a case being postponed. A matter has been postponed because the case is still there. But I have a sense that training in our institutions might not be in par with what is being expected on the ground, on a sense that, for instance, you send someone to court without some bit of court training or understanding, they're going to depend on some article from either EWN or News 24 to build into their case. What they're doing is that they're basically repeating what has been written by someone else. And I said to myself, since COVID-19 dawned on us, I thought every newsroom would have some sort of a health reporter, right? Because you read about health each and every day. Much as you have a business desk, you have a political desk, which in many cases is not a political desk, it's just running after politicians, writing gossips, making relationship with politicians, and they feel that are political reporters. You need to have a health reporter because we're being told that every day that diabetes is the number one killer in SA, right? But this you hardly find in our articles. You only hear about the EFF, the ANC, the MK, the Warawara, a lot of this noise. But also, there's a problem that when journalists goes into the field, they want to make a relationship with politicians. Politicians want to be celebrities, journalists want to be politicians. Chief, comrade, during media briefing. It's so unattractive for someone who's sitting at home that you could hear a comrade in a sense of a party member calling someone comrade who's a journalist. That a journalist can refer to a leader of a political party as CIC. The moment you call me CIC, you're basically saying, I'm under you, you are my commander-in-chief, if that's what the term says. What does that say? It means that even the way in which I report about you could be compromised, because if I refer to you as SG, it means that you are my SG. I don't want to make the SG angry. I want to report good about the SG. So these are some of the things that we need to have conversations about amongst ourselves as journalists, to say that, listen to a US media briefing. It's Mr. Trump, it's Mr. Obama, it's Mr. whatever, because that's what they are. They're not our friends. We don't have dinner with them. And our relationship, it's on a professional level. So I think these are things, like I was saying, that they need to be drummed into young reporters, that when you go into the field, and I said it somewhere else, that you're taking with yourself the name of everyone. When they say journalists are like this, they don't say that specific journalist, they're saying all journalists are like that. So we've got to ensure that beyond the professional training, there's a way in which we teach students about ethics, how they conduct themselves out there. And in many cases, like I'm saying, it's easy for a comrade to see that they can manipulate based on how then you interact with them. Like I was saying, you've got to have a health beat. You've got to have someone, because in many cases you find that a person who's reporting on the judiciary, it's not a journalist, it's someone who has studied law, but they might have seen a bit of a gap there, that it's a space that I can take. And you've got a reporter that in some cases is found to not doing their work because they can't function in such a space. What I'm saying is that in as far as training is concerned, we need to have a bit of a public-private partnership. Have a Mr. Baloi come do a talk on a journalism class around government communication. Because in many cases, we write from a space of just research, but on the ground, what is it that's needed? And I think we need professionals to come and drum that into our students.
Thanks. Thank you so much. I think I just want to address the question that Mr. Baloyi raised around the unions and whether unions support members after they lose their jobs. And he was also questioning the issue of what he called, unionism for the sake of unionism. I think first and foremost, almost everything that we have in our society today, in South Africa in particular, when we look at things like medical aid benefit, emsebenzini at work, when you look at paid public holidays, when you look at maternity leave, paternity leave, the fact that companies even offer pension fund schemes, you can thank the union for that. And it is because unions fought for those things. At the same time, and now I'm just going to punt MISA, because honestly, the union that I represent offers massive benefits to workers, besides the things that already exist in our labor regime. When you join the Motor Industry Staff Association, you get all kinds of benefits, maternity benefit, funeral cover, educational support benefits and bursaries. We even offer support for parents who are paying for matric dances. And we offer opportunities to workers for training and for studying. In fact, a lot of workers in South Africa, broadly speaking, are able to map out better careers thanks to unions, because trade unions actually create pathways for training so that you can be allowed to get promoted in your work, you get better work opportunities. So the unions play a very fundamental role in improving the general life of society. We, as a country, have had a very big debate around the national health insurance, where we are pushing government to offer health cover for everyone. That is a debate that was started by unions. So I just feel it's very important to stress the importance that unions play in ensuring not just that their paid members are benefiting, but that society at large is benefiting. And if I can just add that MISA itself right now is embroiled in a court case against a very brutal employer called Motus, which has, in our view, wrongfully retrenched workers, and we are defending those workers who are retrenched. So I once again want to stress the importance of unions, the importance of joining a union, because the benefit of being part of a union far exceeds what you will ever pay for, and it can cover you well beyond even death and for the benefit of your family and your children. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Phakamile. I think there's a lot that I can add to what she's already answered, specifically regarding trade unions representing non-members or members that can't pay their fees anymore. I've got two examples. Post-COVID, obviously, there was the struggles at Denel, where they didn't pay salaries of workers. I specifically drafted resolutions that served before our executive council, and I think it was for 9 months that we didn't receive a fee from a Denel member. We fought the court battle and they got their salaries. We didn't ask members to pay back the fees that we didn't receive, So as an example, our constitution allows for processes like that. We are currently in a dispute about the collective agreement with one of the SOEs in the aviation sector, and the same thing applies there. We aren't receiving our fees because the deductions aren't paid over to us by the employer. And we've taken a decision about 2 weeks ago that we will continue the fight regarding our recognition at that specific workplace, even though we aren't receiving fees. I also think another important part is it's not only in battles like those where we think about employees that cannot pay their salaries. I don't speak on behalf of all trade unions, but I can tell you what Solidarity has done. We think about our members and their careers in the sense that we approach it from the cradle to the grave, you know. So we focus a lot. We've got our training institutions. We focus on training when you are in your career. So we've got hundreds of training courses that you can do as a member. If you pay your membership, you can do those for free. Obviously, if you can't pay it because of an employer like the NAL or something like that, you can still do those courses because we can accommodate members like that in situations like that. We have partnered with a recruitment agency, so our members have access to a recruitment agency which allows you to get a job when you become unemployed. And we've also created an online platform where employers can advertise posts. You know, so there's a lot of things that we've done to think about what people need when they are unemployed, because I think this is something that we've been confronted with for many years now. It's not a new problem. I think to that specific sector and industry, you know, a lot of these things are new, but it's something that we've seen. I think other sectors have gone through processes like this where technology changes, the way society needs specific services changes. You know, if you look at the age of industrialization, which is basically gone now, and things like that, where manufacturing jobs and industries are getting smaller because of technology, those sectors went through things like what the media industry is experiencing now. And we've learned from that. And I think the advantage of that is we've put things in place which this sector now benefits from.
Yeah, you know, the reason you were treated in the way that you were at the summers is because someone knows that you are not organized. They know that there's no organization that is going to raise alarm in the public for the matter to be taken as seriously. So once again, it just emphasizes the point that there should be some sort of an organization that looks after the interests of the media at your level. So perhaps it's something that you need to look into, because there should already have been some kind of a statement on Sunday or even on Monday where you outline your issues as an organization. So it's an opportunity there that I think you need to try exploit. As to whether training institutions prepare young people for the world of work, I think there's some work that still needs to be done there. Some of our members are editors in the newsrooms as we speak. They tell us of the experiences of the young journalists that are coming from those institutions. They've got some concerns in terms of the quality that they're receiving in the workplace. Some of them, they don't necessarily go into the newsroom. They come into government where they are practicing as journalists and they are requested to do certain things. You can see that they are struggling to adjust between the classroom and the newsroom. So there is some work that needs to be done there. Once again, it goes back to what we said earlier, that it seems there's no investment in training anymore, which is a huge issue. So it's something that I think we need to try focus on. I think they need to be told that they are no longer just sharing information. There was a time when some of us would drive 6 hours, go to Nongoma, get the story, drive back to Durban to the Daily News, you write the story, you go home, you sleep, the story breaks the next day, and it's a front page, which means there's 12 or 15 hours of that story just being with you. That is gone. Now you no longer just share information. It's the battle of the control of the narratives. How then do you equip yourself with the skill that is required for you to be able to go to one story but come up with a slightly different approach to that story, which will add value, empower people, make sure that they're informed and that they're able to make decisions about their lives. Thank you.
So I'm going to pose the last two questions. I'm looking at the time, which came through via our YouTube feed. Oh, okay. All right, let me ask the two questions and then we'll wrap up with our author there. The first question is from Famida Kasim, and the question says, can a journalist working for South African media house that waived their right to join a trade union bypass this? And then the second question is from Mukhumutsi, and it says, is there a role for government agencies like MDDA, Mr. Baloi, to play, especially in funding new media projects where journalists who are leaving legacy media through retrenchments can remain in the sector? And then we'll let Bratemba ask his question before we allow the panel to respond.
Thanks very much, Chair. I was not prepared to say anything because I'm doing a research on the reasons why journalists no longer belong. Quite painful, because what some of them are saying is quite bizarre. I mean, senior journalists saying that the SANEF will represent us. That's quite bizarre when a senior journalist says SANEF will represent them. So there's this thing which I'm trying to understand of the psyche of journalists, Prof. Is that as soon as they start working and they go up, they think that there is no role of unions. There are two words for them. Unity is strength. We've seen how their rights get trampled in the newsrooms by the very same, some of us whom we grew up with, they became editors and top positions. As soon as they climb up the ladder, they kick the step ladder. Labor Relations Act guarantees the right of unions. So there is no two ways about it that, no, the union's role is that. I was baptized in Mwasa, in the Soweto newsroom, 1994. In 1998, we formed the Forum of Black Journalists. Let's go back and ask what happened. The very same things were the divisions within the newsrooms where we no longer stand. Elijah, when you started, I was at the start. I can give you a story whom I'm not going to name that person, that journalist. We went to a workshop, because some of us are vocal and vociferous, where we said, no intern will go and cover a protest without a senior journalist. But guess what? The editors transgressed and sent one young journalist who later became a top editor. I stood up and fought. He was not happy because they don't understand what solidarity is. One friend of mine and close friend, whom we still laugh about it, was sent to cover Mamope's story, driving in and out in Mafikeng. That is exploitation. So we cannot sit here and begin and say that what is the role of union? That question is misplaced. So let's go back to the basics. Journalists organize, journalists mobilize. Prof. Jali and professors, I'll say professors, we need you. In terms of the question that was asked, in terms of the curriculum of journalism, please ensure that you slot the aspect of labor relations act so that these kids can understand it. But the saddest part is that even those who understand it, senior journalists who are considered investigative writers, tell no, I don't belong, and my issues are major issues. What kind of nonsense is that? I'm sorry, I was baptized in Mwasa, and I was part and parcel of the Forum of the Journalists, which was killed by the Human Rights Commission. And I got anger, and I wrote articles about that. And I said, I won't forgive them, even today. Sorry, Chair. I haven't every morning, I'm back again in Victoria, so I had not to miss this session because of part of my research. And because of Phakamile, she missed our conversation. I said, Prof, the book that you endorsed, I call it a rebel with a cause. Thank you very much.
Okay, and then the last question from Tumelo. Very, very last question.
Okay, thank you so much. Good evening, guys. My name is Tumelo Matlala, and I'm an entry-level journalist, but I'm not sure yet. I want to be a communicator. So I want to pose this question to the panelists. Suppose a journalist has evidence of a wrongdoing by a major advertiser of the publication or media house. Now, the management tells the journalist not to pursue the story because the company contributes significant advertising revenue. Now, the journalist believes publishing it is in the public interest. Whose right take priority? 1, the journalist editorial independence. 2, the employer's commercial interest. 3, the public right to know. Now, within hours, let's say the journalist went ahead with the story. Now, within hours, within publishing the story, now he gets personal attacks and threats and attempt to reveal private information. The journalist reports this to the employer, tells them that I have received threats from so-and-so. Now, who carries the responsibility for protecting journalists from the harassment? And how does the union protect the journalists in this regard? Thank you so much.
I think just do one at a time.
I'll start. He will deal with the difficult part. So it's not just the advertiser who will put pressure on you. We also have journalists, even in our media briefings, Baloyi will tell you, who are being sent questions to ask them this question, ask them this question. So it's there. The employer will always want to put pressure on you. But the other thing about publishing, things have changed now. There used to be a long chain. You would go out, write the story, it goes to your editor, it gets changed or amended or whatever. It then goes to sub-editors who will then lay it out and then put a headline and all those things. So there is a chain. Even if you wanted your story to be published, if the employer doesn't want the story, it won't see the day of light. So that scenario that you are painting there may not be realized in that form. There are many journalists who are in the newsroom who are sitting with great stories that were threatening the life of their employers, and they were never published. In fact, maybe this is something that, Themba, you need to talk to former journalists. I know that a lot of us, not all the stories that we wrote were actually published. So that happens, it's there, but you need to remember as a journalist that your first priority is the public, it's not your employer. You account to the public. That's why even when your employer goes to court, they say it's the public's right to know. It's in the public interest when they want to win whatever access that they are applying for in the court, or when they want to access certain information. But there is that contradiction that you've just outlined there, that they will suppress a story which they feel is threatening the livelihood of the... But that is wrong, because the principles of journalism are being broken, are being contravened in that situation. But it's one of the contradictions that we have to live with, unfortunately. But in terms of how the union will represent you, that's the question that Helgard will tell you.
Look, I think that specific question boils down to the protections that you would find in the Occupational Health and Safety Act. It's not something that I'm necessarily an expert on, but I can give you the basic about the principles that I know about that, and that is that the employer should create a safe workspace. Now, obviously, if you're a policeman, that doesn't mean that you can't go out and do your work. I think there are certain things that you expose yourself to depending on your occupation. I think receiving threats is sort of an occupational hazard for journalists, depending on what you report on. But I mean, depending on the nature of those threats, I think there would be an obligation on an employer in terms of the Occupational Health and Safety Act to make sure that there's a safe workspace. So I think it will all depend on the specific facts of the case and whether a trade union can use the rights in terms of the Occupational Health and Safety Act to ensure that they do something about it. Maybe just, there was another question, one of the online questions was specifically about the right to belong to a trade union and whether you can waive that in a contract. So your right to belong to a trade union is specifically granted in Section 23(2) of the Constitution. It's part of the Bill of Rights, which means it's a fundamental right, which we can also explain as a basic human right that's enshrined in our Constitution. It means you cannot contract it away. A contract to waive that right would be an illegal contract. So in essence, that waiver doesn't mean anything if it's evaluated in terms of our legislation and our law.
All right, and then Mr. Baloyi on that MDDA one, yes, for funding.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. Let me also appreciate the discussion after that. So quite enriching. And it shows that all the stories that Phakamile was talking about, that unions do this, all that what solidarity, then it means we need journalists to tell those stories. Remember, if you have a good story and no one knows about it, it's, yeah. But now here is another problem, which I'm coming from a government point. You can have the best journalists ever, but they need a platform to tell their stories, which goes to the owners of the media. And it's one factor that it appears we don't want to touch. Let me tell you what we have done. Government took a decision that we cannot follow the mantra that says what? Freedom of whatever. But they dissipate right in front of your eyes. Then we said, because mainstream media has owners, we have an interest in the public broadcasting. We have a very serious interest. And they reach all the corners that most people don't even reach, including into the neighboring countries. But it remains a contested terrain. Then we identified community media, because we thought that community media are telling the stories of the community. Let me tell you, a process that I'm responsible for. I went to a certain province now, because we have a list of them. Then we said, we have taken a decision, one, to say all the departments have to make sure that they advertise on community media. So GSIS was then given an MDDA, that thing to say, check them that they comply. We started that. Do you know what has happened? I'm telling you the honest truth. One province I went, 10 of the community media that used to be independent have been bought by a main player, a new player, into the media industry now. We went to another province. They've been bought already. So you see that cutthroat competition of profit. So now the question is, as government, what do you do? Is a company, you wanted to assist those, then they've already bought them. You can check for yourself, colleagues, as we see. I don't want to mention the new players in that. Then there is another issue, training. And I'm happy you spoke about it. The Department of Justice came to us as GSIS. They say we have a problem with how cases are reported, especially your gender-based cases, your child. They say the victims suffer secondary victimization by the way it's reported, especially on your community media. I don't want to get into that, but we approached, organized, to say, can we get a product on this? Then it was a different story. Then as GCIS, we then decided that we'll do it ourselves. We started in the Northern Cape, we trained them, we had the Department of Justice assisting them, how do you report? We went to the Free State, we trained them, I was there. We went to Mpumalanga, so we are moving with all these provinces. We are training them exactly on what he has raised, to say, when you report on issues of sexual abuse, gender violence, don't cause secondary victimization. It's not something that you have to make a song and dance on. So then what does this mean? And which I think Bob Prof will assist us, will assist the unions, will assist us, is that there is a business component in the media. And as government, it's difficult because we need to provide the space for everyone, including the business. But then now when they take them, as I'm indicating to you now, go to all the knock and drops that used to be freely available. They are now purchased, they are bought. And it's a problem now because when they buy them, they have to also maximize profit. What do? Those journalists are not well trained yet in community media. They still need to be assisted. I see when we deal with radio, we are training them, the ones that are doing community radio, we are assisting them with funding now. And now, at least on them, ICASA is assisting us so that big business should not buy them. So that's where we are concentrating. So on the print one, I think that's where a further discussion from your platforms should ensue to say, because it's hurting, to be honest. You have very intelligent journalists in South Africa. It's hurting to see those pens just drying, the ink drying. And the question is, and this one, yeah, but let me say it anyway. I had a discussion with somebody who has a very serious influence in their finances. I said, brain drain there. We are being drained in South Africa. We will be unable to tell our stories. We are not going to have journalists who stand against Trump in the White House here. And he said, I am not sure if the journalists in the practice don't gain experience of how the business side of their companies are run. He said, many journalists that are unemployed now, if they can organize themselves because they know the trade. He said there is a platform that I won't mention that can fund them, which has funded. You know, when the independent newspapers come here, who funded them? Who funded them? From Ireland. Who funded them? You know that government still has shares in some. So he said, if those guys can organize themselves as a business entity, but interested in the news information, surely I can tell you their application will be successful. But the question would be what I think Temba said something, said, then we were destroyed, Massa was destroyed. So that unity, organization of purpose, if they unite, I look at them, you have the excellent skills and pens, but now that business component part of it. But at the same time, the big boys are interested. You see them. I mean, I was arguing with certain company, and you know what? They say, no, we are now acquired these titles. Can you advertise with us? And I said, oh, all right. And then you look at that, you said, that's not where we are going. So those are the nuances and the dynamics that are a real thing. But it's hurting, colleagues, to see journalists that you know, that these ones can write a true story. But they are in the legend. And for government is a one. For government is a one. Because once you lose that part, no one is going to tell your story. No one. So I was just trying to put that. And on that one of the summers, government doesn't run the summers. We only sponsor when we are requested to sponsor. But in terms of the nuances of that, the one that I know we are leading, championing direct, is to make sure that all the provinces, you can check, colleagues, we have been issuing advisories, you see them. We've been going to all the provinces. We are telling them that province X, 30% of your budget, local media. They are implementing, but what is happening now? The big guys are buying off the titles. That is our problem. And I'm happy people Temba, they are vocal, they are there. You are here, colleagues. You will also assist us to say, how do we do when things are this? And the chairperson, my apologies, I Googled you. You used to run a community newspaper in, what is it? Is it Northern Cape? Oh. What exactly? And I checked because what we thought, we said, why don't we do a desktop research and go for a targeted approach to say, this person once ran a newspaper. Let's go to that person and say, Imran, where she went? I mean, it's tough. How can we help you to resuscitate your paper on your own with your own experience? And then let's bring in this, resources to assist them. So I'm making an open clarion call on record to say those are our challenges, but we are open as government. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that. I'm going to ask Dumelo to help me hand over our tokens of appreciation to our panelists, but also I will invite Prof. Jali to also receive his. And I must declare that, look, we could have gone to Lucresat or Carol Boys, but we know some of you have to declare, so we played it safe so that you don't have to deal with those compliance issues. And then and then I think just to wrap up, thank you to everyone that has joined us in person, even those who have joined us virtually, but a great appreciation to our panelists. I think they really helped to enrich the conversation. Even the feedback from our online colleagues has been great. Thank you so much. Prof. Jali, thank you so much for always hosting us when we need a venue. And then colleagues, we do a raffle for those who normally join our sessions. And this evening we have great prizes, including vouchers as well as a desk fridge. So our raffle tickets are 10 rands. You will see there by registration desk. Our secretariat is still selling tickets, but I will now invite everyone to join us for refreshments and a bit of networking outside, and then we'll return a few minutes later just to do the raffle draw before we all head home. Thank you so much. May I ask Brawili, Prof. Jali, Antoinette, let's all take a group photo with the panel, please.
Purpose as National Press Club is to network. We believe in relationships.
We were not asked for comment by the department, but this all changed thanks to the influx of the Chinese and the Indian vehicle brands.
I'm very, very excited to be part of the team.
The grabbing headlines are sometimes fairly complicated.
Our interest is the victim.
We wanted to have this relationship, partnership with National Press Club.
From the very beginning, that is the consensus reached by G20 members, and South Africa play a leading role.
In your book, you do make mention of that, the challenges faced by community media.
And I can tell you many of people you see on TV are from community media.
So my strategy was, okay, I realized Donald Trump has a short attention span. Just scream out one word and then he turns.
Basically, I love what I do. I can't wait to wake up in the morning.
There's an onus upon us as journalists because democracy dies in darkness and we are the torch.